To put things into context, last year I was doing some work for the UN in Bhutan, and when I hiked, there's a famous monastery, Tiger's Nest over there. At 10,000 feet, I saw monks who were using their smartphones. So the surprising thing was not that they were using the smartphones, but rather they weren't getting any connection at all. Because I sometimes have trouble even at 5 feet. But I was curious about, why are these monks invested in smartphones? And so I asked my hosts, who pays for these things, and the data plans and so on and so forth. And they said, well, they get a stipend every month, and they collect that over a period of time, and they invest in smartphones because they want to, A, entertain themselves when they have some free time, and B, they want to communicate to their family because they are all far apart. And so smartphones and mobility have truly reached even the remote corners of the planet. But if you look at historically what has happened, 5 years is a long amount of time. If you go back 5 years, in 2007, iPhone was just announced, and obviously we all know how that turned out. Android was still not there. Twitter and Facebook were there, but were doing hardly anything in mobile. And at Microsoft was at its peak in smartphone penetration at about 42%. And fast forward 5 years, things have radically changed. We're not only in a new era, whether you want to call it post-PC or just the evolution of the same continuum of computing, it feels that we are just running at a tremendous pace. So we can't even imagine what things might be like 5 years hence. But we have a smart group of CTOs who will help us figure out what those experiences and technologies and platforms will be like. And so we have with us James from PayPal, Galvin from Accenture, and Henry from Nokia. So to get us started, Henry, I'd like to ask you about identity, because right now, over the past 30 years, identity of a person and as well as a service is tied to a phone number. Does that concept change over time? Would we worry about tying identity of a person to a phone number, or will it evolve into something different?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it comes actually, boils down to the interesting notion that these mobile computers, as they are wireless devices and they connect to each other, they use different type of connectivity. So in the licensed bandwidth of radio connectivity, there is a highly regulatory aspects and other aspects that actually tie the identity in particular ways in different parts of the world. In an unlicensed bandwidth connectivity, as you know, there are then higher layer identities which typically tend to be associated with the services. Your Facebook identity or your Twitter handle or whatever. The hassle that already exists now is that when you try to move seamlessly from a licensed to unlicensed or back and forth, you sort of lose your identity because the connectivity doesn't allow you to do that. There's a lot of proposals on how to handle this, but it's a very deep business question also for example, operators. So the tying the identity to the device or basically something else that is the identity element in the device, like SIM card, is actually very crucial to many of the sort of operations of the operator. So my personal view, if I have to predict the future, is that it might end up in a situation much faster that is hidden by a layer, that your identity is managed as a federated identity underneath your user scene identity, but with the various different requirements, even with respect to what you do.
And James, identity is crucial for payments and commerce. How do you think about identity and how a user and a merchant develop a relationship for a transaction?
We think there's a huge opportunity to decrease the friction that it goes on right now in the industry when a consumer is trying to pay a merchant. And an example, a use case that we might have to illustrate this is when you walk into your Starbucks today, you typically They don't know you. They don't have an affinity. They don't know if you come every day or once a year. And what we see is this opportunity to build a payment infrastructure where when you walk in, you can, with geofencing and other things, check in essentially, and then set identity, set credentials, and control it securely, and say every time I come within this perimeter, go ahead and open a tab. And then there are all kinds of things that come from there that are streamlined. Imagine I walk into a store and I don't even pull out my wallet. I don't even open up my phone because I've already pre-authorized it. And we know securely where you are. You've already authorized it. You get text messages immediately after a transaction happens, and you walk up, they see your picture, your name, you tell who you are, and you walk out.
So do you think that that transaction or the process of doing a transaction that becomes invisible in the course of going in and out of the store?
That's right. One of the beauties of these platforms is to make what is complicated easier. And where there's friction, take friction out of the process.
So Galvin, one of the things that will help that is understanding the context of the user and history of the user, doing credit card checks before even they are taking the stuff out or before the transaction even takes place. Clearly a lot of companies are investing in that contextual capability, intelligence capability. How do you think it's going to evolve? And will we see silos of companies doing contextual elements, or do you think there will be a layer that everybody builds on?
I think it'll start off silo-driven. I mean, it's clear that the biggest change we're seeing is being able to take that contextual information and then build on what James is saying to be able to really deliver that customized experience. So about who you are, where you are, what you're doing, and then being able to take that data and deliver a highly customized experience to the end consumer. The challenge is what infrastructure is there to do that at the moment.
Yeah.
So everyone is replicating. So we're all taking in and trying to look for data, whether it be geo-data that we get, or location-based data that we're getting in from the carriers, whether it be streams from Twitter, whether it be feeds in from the other social media networks, and trying to aggregate and analyze that. I think what we're seeing is a new growth of companies that are trying to disintermediate and almost build that layer that's allowing then end customers to actually get that experience from organizations where they don't have to worry about building the plumbing or the infrastructure. So it's starting, but it's very small steps.
And what about the data that ties in with that platform, right? Understanding of the user and user history with a merchant. Who do you think will end up owning?
Who owns the data?
Yeah, I mean.
That's going to be one of the seminal questions that's going to go through here. Is the data owned by the user? Is it owned by the aggregator? Is it owned by the person who stores it? And that's really going to be a fundamental challenge here. At the moment, I don't think there's any clear model that's working. At the moment, most people are realizing that they have to give up a degree of privacy in order to participate in these services. So the thing that's captive around this is the fact that I will give up privacy because what I'm getting back is relevant and adding value to me. The real challenge that we've got now is to be able to take that and honor that trust and do it in a way that remains relevant to what the end user is wanting.
Okay. Let's talk about kind of the form factors. We used to smartphones, tablets now, Kindles are in the market. Obviously 5 years ago, tablets were not around in any successful way, shape, or form. 5 years out, do you see the form factor, different form factors coming into the marketplace that a single user might have, or do you see that as a niche area and we'll still have the same form factor for smartphones and tablets and rest is kind of niche? Like, how do we get to this 50 billion sensors all around us or devices around us? Do you see a change in the form factor capability, or is going to be different types of sensors? Maybe Henry, you can start with that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I always say that the form factors for general computing machines, which I still consider tablets and smartphones and these devices to be, tend to follow one path. And then you have a special purpose devices. Now, why this becomes now interesting is in this generation or the next generation of computers, the multi-device, some people call it multi-screen, but I actually don't agree with the multi-screen because some of these devices don't need to have a screen. Your computer consists of these multiple devices. This actually accelerates the form factor sort of evolution or variance because you start having offloading of some of the tasks that you have to another device which is close to you, which we already see in many cases. You can do something with the smartphone, it's nicer to look at something or video on a tablet form factor and going on. So my argument is that in fact this evolution will be accelerated because of the multi-device, but there's even a more important thing, which is the energy consumption. Because the other devices, the bigger devices consume more energy, but they handle like all the tasks at the same time, which some of the tasks are something you need to be always on, and some of the tasks you would not need to do that. So having smaller form factor that actually wakes the bigger one up or gives you messaging, for example, prompting, uses very little energy, as opposed to having a big device that is doing the same polling all the time. So that combined with the material developments of, and flexible electronics and others later on will allow you actually to do much more higher variance of this. But the key to this is that it's not a single device so much anymore. It's a multi-device computer. So the new notion of personal computing.
So do you think we'll separate kind of the screen from the computing, or it stays attached?
We don't separate the screen from computing. I'm a computer scientist, first of all, so as a disclaimer, I see everything as computers. I've seen them for 40 years as computers. I still see them as computers. So my view is that in the old days, the computer had a memory, I/O, CPU, and a bus. Now the next generation of computers, they have individual components that have functions that can be used separately, but when you put them together, they form a richer thing. So in some sense, it's not the screen or the I/O itself that is separated. It can also be your communication capability in messaging and others. And then you have another facility which is good for media consumption, for example.
Yeah. Let's talk about the impact of mobile on the vertical industries. And the one that's really talked about is, at least recently, is retail. Retailers are struggling to figure out how they challenge Amazon and others. Do you think mobile enables them to come back strongly and have a stake in the marketplace, or do you see fundamentally that big box retailer model is broken and they need to change that and become more like online retailers?
It absolutely is a vehicle for them to differentiate. And what we're seeing is enormous interest in retailers to incorporate the technology that consumers now have in their pockets to make an improved buying experience. They know that people do research offline and they come in the store, and what we're finding is that there's an explosion of innovation. You'd think payments and all these other areas are rapidly adopting to these new technologies. And I think what you'll see is some of the tools and techniques that were used online, so the old website tracking, analytics, targeted marketing, are now going offline. So when I'm walking around with a device in my pocket, I could be tracked, I could be targeted, I could have loyalty, I can have a more intimate experience with a retailer. Mm-hmm. And the retailers are very aggressive in differentiating themselves. So I think you'll see a lot of innovation because each one of them wants to be that leading company that grabs the mind share and improves the experience. I mean, how many of you walk into the Apple store in a mall and it's packed and it's really something that people recognize they can take advantage of to draw customers in and give them reasons to come into the store.
Gavin, how about other industries, other verticals? How are CIOs and CTOs of big and small companies looking at mobile to not only have a conversation, different kind of conversation with the customer, but also internally empower their workforce?
So I think we're seeing consumers are empowered more than ever before by the technology they're carrying. Yeah. So whilst those retail sectors, and it doesn't have to be traditional retailing, it can be telecoms, it can be financial services, those adjacent industries as well, but these empowered consumers are coming to work as employees and they're demanding the same thing back from their enterprise IT. This is one of the big challenges that we're out talking to CIOs about, which is how do you take those technologies and allow your field force to be automated in a way that gives them the information when they need it, but understanding the unique environment within which they work. So voice recognition, for example, is something that's also still important when you're a utility worker and you've got a glove on and you can't use a touch screen. So really being able to understand how the mobile experience can impact their field forces, their employees, the way in which they collaborate, trying to really use that new use case of increased team productivity and corporate productivity. We also see in some other places this use of the sensor information, being able to manage plant in a different way, being able to manage maintenance schedules differently, being able to really understand what's happening out in resource industries, in utilities, in mining. So this mobile phenomena is really affecting not just the horizontals, but the deep verticals as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, if we look at, I grew up with Star Trek. You come into an area and you start talking to the room and things happen. A lot of stuff is happening in the automation space, speech, space, gesture, and whatnot. 5 years out, where do you see home automation is with respect to, from opening your door to lights, energy, entertainment, syncing of files, communication? Where do you see things headed in the home environment with respect to the role that mobile plays? Maybe Henry can start and then Gavin.
It's a very interesting question, and you get a different answer from geeks and from real people. So I try to represent both of them here. So it's truly in the technology. If I take it from a technology perspective, a lot of the stuff could be easily done now with the reasonable gesture recognition. You can have various different type of sensors that monitor the environment in a cost-effective way. The devices and the software, it's not that difficult. You could use a mobile device as a gateway, or you could use something else as a gateway, and you could do it. But it's a little bit the same thing than in the location-based systems. I mean, we started talking about the location-based systems and the stuff in late 90s. We had all the concepts that we are just now seeing coming. So there has to be also some kind of other incentive for people to do it. Like I said, for somebody who wants to live the alpha life of everything moving around and responding to you, it's good. For many people already, the questions of the voice and conversational UI, like we say, the voice stuff, is a barrier or something to be learned. So one should not underestimate that if you put the technology somewhere, it's going to be used because there happens to be some technology. And I think the consumers understanding what people are willing to learn. I'm not saying that what they would be doing now, because many of these experiences would be new that they wouldn't know. What they're willing to learn is the key to the success of this home stuff. In theory, technologically, embedding sensors in the infrastructure, fine. At the same time, it produces a new value chain. Who maintains these sensors? I mean, it's an integrated system. It's almost like a package that you need to be careful. You have liability questions. You have questions of interference. Your neighbors put up all the radio. By the way, because these are radio devices, this is a real issue because your neighbors put up all these interesting radio devices there and your TV stops working. So I think these are the hindrances in the 5-year scale. I'm looking at decade of uncertainty in the location-based traffic. Mobile advertising still hasn't sort of caught up. So I'm not pessimistic on the actual thing, but I believe that it can be usually much longer than the 5 years in a wide spectrum. At the same time, some killer user cases might happen.
Example?
Well, I would say that Linus and I once figured out what makes people to motivate, to adopt new technology. So we had first was survival, second one was social relationships, third one was entertainment. If we assume we're talking about developing countries, I would say entertainment. So as we see in Kinect and others, the sort of new type of interaction model by sensors is entertainment. If you try to make it something very serious, usually it doesn't fly as fast. If you get then to another like growth economies, it will be definitely survival. There might be cases where the sensor and all this is really a difference between your survival or your farming survival or crop survival or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about kind of ecosystem and platforms for a little bit. James, there's a lot of debate in the industry with respect to the role of the operator. I mean, they have dominated the revenue stream for last couple of decades. There's seeing a lot of challenge from the OTT players, over-the-top players, in various aspects of their business, voice and messaging. They're trying something in payments and commerce. From your vantage point, what do you see the role of operators that can help enable your business, as well as their role in general 5 years out?
Sure. One way to think about it is who are the gatekeepers? I look at it, money, how many times has currency changed in the history of humankind? We had bartering, right? We had the invention of money. We had the invention of checking and then credit. What we're seeing is the full digitization of money now. And what we need are trusted ecosystems to deliver that. So I think operators are key enablers to streamline that whole experience. They have a lot of security information. It's a trusted network. They have a relationship with that consumer. And yet, there's not a lot of wiggle room in the system for new middlemen who take significant amounts. So the key is, how does it differentiate their product suite, differentiate their network, add a lot of value to consumers and other people in the payment industry. But they have a very critical and strategic role in enabling the whole world effectively.
So is the role more of an enabler or an OTT player themselves?
I believe it's an enabler, because at the end of the day, people need to trade globally. And there will be, there's certain things that you need to be specialized in your field. And when you're dealing with money, there's governments and regulations and compliance and risk models that aren't people's core competency. So you need to always stick to what's core and what's context.
Given from a platform perspective, if you look at 5 years ago, Android was 0, Windows was 45, Apple was close to 11% at the end of 2007. Today, things have kind of flipped. Android dominates. Apple is doing great with its 29-30%, and Microsoft is on its kind of growth trajectory. 5 years out, would platforms matter as much as they do today, or there are going to be 2 or 3 platforms that kind of dominate the ecosystem 5 years out?
It's an interesting question. I think there will be 2 or 3 that dominate, because you'll need critical mass of developers producing apps to entice people to buy the devices, to ultimately end up being part of that ecosystem. So I think from a platform perspective, I think people will be doing everything they can to bring developers onto their environments, and will realize the key to success for them to be able to get their environment, to be successful with their devices, is just how many developers are creating the apps. But I think the platforms might go further than what we see today. I mean, to Henry's point about home automation, I mean, you can get today, we're starting to see lighting systems and light bulbs come out with Wi-Fi chips in them. So, there are light bulb manufacturers who want to build a connected platform that's attracting developers, so that I can create an app here that does all the lighting in my house. So I think our view of platforms might broaden, with 2 or 3 that are playing a critical role on the devices, but with others that are helping encourage and act as a catalyst in some of these other ambitions that we have, whether it be in home automation, whether it be the way sensors get deployed, whether it be the way in which payments are taken, for example.
Okay. We'll take a couple of quick audience questions, if there are any. The question about bandwidth, will it get better? Or what's the question? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Is bandwidth the limiter?
Oh, is bandwidth the limiter? I mean, clearly, 5 years ago, it was less than 1 megabits per second. We're getting to tens of 20 megabits per second. But our demand seems to be outpacing that. So that brings up an interesting question, whether is technology be able to meet the demand, as well as the spectrum that's available going to keep up with the demand or not? Or do we need to invent new ways to communicate that doesn't require spectrum, current spectrum at all?
Yes, teleportation is good also. Well, I'll just give you a first take, and then you want to have a different. So this is the computer scientist answer would be that there's never enough memory or disk space. Bandwidth has a little bit the similar sort of feature. You introduce a new capacity, and it is filled by the availability of the new capacity of the new applications. Why we see it so drastically now is that because of, by law of large numbers, we have so many devices and users using that the peaks start, the consumption goes up very fast. The same way like if you have in a sports event, you have a lot of people there and something is, catching their eye, everybody does it, and you suddenly have a huge problem. Now, we know that the technology developments are multiple. So the dynamic allocation of spectrum, and you've heard the terms of cognitive radios and whatever you want to call it. I talked about offloading earlier, which is the other way of saying the fact that you try to look at some spectrum that is available. People talk about the secondary usage of spectrum, which is like taking TV space, and if there's any, space you're doing, that will go forward, and then more and more, that spectrum will be used. The finally interesting question there becomes on how the timings of the new applications and this evolution will match. So the catastrophes always happen in the factor where the other one is, the usage suddenly seems to exceed the anticipated technology development on that, or vice versa. Remember that after the recession, there was a large period of time that in Europe, particularly the 3G networks were underutilized because there was an overestimate of this one. So, but the bandwidth will always be as crucial as do you have enough space to store something? And I've argued otherwise that the fundamentally interesting unifying notion will be energy. Because it takes energy to communicate, and it takes energy to store, and it takes energy to compute. Yeah. So you have to make a trade-offs here. So energy will be the limiting factor. In the shorter term, you see different sort of instances of it happening, and bandwidth is one of them.
So just one last question. Would like each of you to comment. If at the end of the conference, Mark gave you $10 million to invest in one idea, and based on your understanding of the industry, what will you invest in?
Only 10?
Well, we'll start with 10.
That's okay.
I'd invest in PayPal. I think in the evolution of the whole industry for payments is on fire, and there's a disruption that's underway, and it's a huge opportunity for people who create a great customer experience.
So is the opportunity just to get to more people using mobile devices for payments and commerce, or is there a fundamental breakthrough that's needed to do something different?
What you're seeing is, if you make the analogy to the internet, there's a class of people in the world who have computers and get online. What you see with mobile is the whole world is getting connected to the internet, and then what comes next is how do all of those people trade with one another? And so it's basically bringing the entire world online and able to exchange value with one another.
I think our time is up. Thanks to our panel, and a big round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.